Hello, welcome to Exclam Chess. In this video, I'll be teaching 3 basic tactics: the fork, the pin, and the skewer. These are all basic tactics that every chess player should know, and they can be put to use in almost every game. So, let's get started. First, we'll take a look at forks. A fork is when one of your pieces attacks 2 or more of your opponent's pieces at the same time. Here, if the white knight takes this pawn here, the knight now attacks both black's queen and black's rook at the same time. Note that the king can't capture the knight to get rid of this fork, since the knight's defended by the bishop. So because of this fork here, that's attacking both the queen and the rook, since the knight is worth less than both of these, this means that white will be able to win a material advantage due to this use of the fork. Here's another example of the fork being put to use. In this position, black temporarily sacrifices his knight for this pawn, since he knows that after white recaptures, now this fork, with the pawn advancing 2 squares forward, will now attack both the bishop and the knight, and black will be able to win his piece back through effective use of the fork. Now we'll move on to pins. A pin is when a piece can't move due to the fact that if it moves, it would allow an attack on a piece of higher value. There are 2 types of pins: absolute pins and relative pins. First, I'll show you an example of an absolute pin. This bishop here is absolutely pinning this rook to the king, since if this rook were to move, it would allow check on the king, and since that can't be allowed, under no circumstances can this rook ever move, since this bishop here would then be attacking the king. A relative pin is when a piece can't move due to it revealing an attack on any piece of high value other than the king, since it could technically move, but it would be a very bad idea. For example, this knight here is relatively pinned to the queen, since this bishop would attack the queen if this knight were ever to move. Last, we'll talk about skewers. A skewer is essentially the opposite of a pin. In a skewer, a piece of higher importance is in front of the piece of lower importance. In this position, it's white to move, and the white queen is skewering black's king and queen. Since the king obviously has to move out of the way, since he is of higher importance, once he moves out of the way, the white queen can capture this black queen. Here's an example of just how useful a skewer can be. In this position, it looks like black's king's about to get checkmated. But luckily it's black's move, and he has this useful skewer here, moving his rook here with check to skewer the white king and queen. If white's king just captures the rook, suddenly the black king doesn't have any moves to make, and the game is drawn by a stalemate. Or, if we go back, after the rook skewers the king and the queen, even if the king just moves out of the way, then black's rook simply takes, and the king takes the rook, and now with no pieces left on the board, black was able to safely get a draw, all thanks to effective use of the skewer.